Ever get that feeling you hear a word like enlightenment and it's like, huh, what's that even mean?
Yeah.
Well, you're not alone. You asked for a deep dive into enlightenment, and we're diving into this two-part article called The Ineffable Experience.
Right.
And get this, it gets kind of mind-bending right from the start.
Yeah, it's interesting because even just trying to pin down what enlightenment is can be, well, a little tricky. I guess for our deep dive, let's say we're talking about someone reaching this state of like super deep understanding, like they're free from all the stuff that usually makes us suffer. But even calling it that freedom from suffering, I mean, some people might disagree with that.
Yeah.
And the article really goes right for this from the start. It's like we're talking about this ultimate wisdom, figuring out what reality really is, and then bam, we're told it can't even be put into words. So how are you supposed to explain something that's, by definition, unexplainable?
Right. It's like trying to explain the internet to, I don't know, like Abraham Lincoln or somebody. The article actually makes a comparison like that. It says, imagine trying to describe what the color red looks like to someone who's been blind their whole life.
Wow.
How would you even start?
I mean, it would be impossible.
Words just wouldn't cut it.
Exactly. And it gets into this whole philosophical thing about qualia. It's basically the idea that there are these subjective, totally individual experiences that you just can't describe objectively.
Okay, I think I get that. So like one person hears a song and it reminds them of like their first love.
Yeah, exactly. And someone else hears the same song and it makes them think of like a road trip with their best friends.
Right. Totally different vibes, even though it's the same music.
Totally. And qualia are like that. So the taste of your coffee in the morning, what it feels like when you're out in a cold breeze, everyone's actually experiencing that a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So some people would say that enlightenment, this thing we're trying to wrap our heads around, is kind of like the ultimate qualia, something you can't ever really truly share.
Okay, so then snap your fingers. If we were suddenly like enlightened
Right now.
right this second, how would we tell anyone else about it? What would we even say?
See, it's a question that's meant to make you really think about just how limited language can be. Like, we depend on words so much for everything, but what happens when they just don't go far enough?
Which brings me to something that's been bugging me this whole time. If enlightenment can't really be explained, why are there so many people out there trying to do exactly that? Like books and traditions and,
It seems like a contradiction, right?
Yeah, right.
Why even bother if words just aren't up to the task? The article actually talks about this, and it suggests that maybe, just maybe, all these attempts to pin down enlightenment with words, maybe it's not about giving you a literal play-by-play of the thing itself.
Okay.
It's more like, imagine you're trying to get to this incredible destination you've never been to before. Someone hands you a map or maybe a guidebook.
Okay.
Those things can be helpful, right?
Yeah, definitely.
They can point you in the right direction. They might give you some handy tools, but they can't actually replicate what it feels like to arrive at that destination.
It's like that Zen saying, the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon.
Yes.
You can look where it's pointing, but don't mix that up with the actual moon.
Exactly. And that leads us to a really important point.
So we've got these maps and guidebooks, right? But they can only take us so far. Which makes me wonder, like, what's the point of even trying to explain this whole enlightenment thing if, as we've been saying, words kind of fall apart when you try to use them?
It's a really good question.
Is it like some kind of cosmic joke?
Maybe not. The article actually digs into this idea, and it suggests that maybe it's like an act of compassion.
Okay.
Think about it. Like if you'd gone through something absolutely life-changing, something so profound, wouldn't there be this part of you that wanted to at least try to share it? Even if you knew words could only do so much.
I get that. Like trying to describe what falling in love feels like to someone who's never been in love. You might sound like an idiot trying to find the right words, but you'd still want them to get a sense of, just how powerful that feeling is.
Exactly. But then the article throws in this other possibility, and this one's a little less comfy. It asks, what if some of these descriptions we have floating around about enlightenment, what if they're not really about accurately conveying an experience at all? What if they're more about someone trying to take their experience and make it fit into these pre-existing ideas about what enlightenment should be?
Okay, hold on. I need like a real world example here. How could someone mistake something for enlightenment when it's not the real deal?
So the article uses this analogy, and it really stuck with me. Imagine someone who's never in their life seen an apple, never even tasted one.
Okay.
And then they come across an orange. And they're like, whoa, it's round, it's kind of sweet, it must be an apple.
Because that's the closest thing they know.
Exactly. They've never actually experienced the real thing, so they're mistaking something similar for it.
So you're saying someone could have a really profound, really amazing experience, and that's great. But they might slap this label of enlightenment on it just because, I don't know, because it fits with what they already believe enlightenment is supposed to be.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more wild. Our minds are seriously powerful things.
Yeah.
Like scarily powerful.
Oh, yeah.
If you believe something strongly enough, if you're convinced that a certain experience is enlightenment, your mind might actually create that experience for you, even if it's not quite the real deal.
So then, how do we untangle that? If our own brains can play tricks on us like that, how can anyone be sure about anything? How do we know if we're experiencing enlightenment or just a really, really convincing illusion?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Seriously.
And the article suggests, and I kind of agree, that maybe the most enlightened stance of all is actually one of humility. Yeah, like being able to admit that we might never fully grasp this whole enlightenment thing. And you know what? That's okay.
You're saying that trying to grab on to some fixed definition of enlightenment and saying, I've got it, that might actually be what's holding us back from actually, getting it.
It's definitely something to consider. What if, instead of always chasing after this grand enlightenment finish line, we just focused on, the journey itself, the learning, the messing up, the slowly, gradually understanding things a little bit better than we did yesterday?
So less about arriving and more about just appreciating the ride. Honestly, that takes a lot of pressure off.
Right. There's so much freedom in that. The freedom to keep exploring, keep questioning everything, and to admit that what we think enlightenment is, that might change 1,000,000 times over our lives.
Makes you think about all the times you were so sure about something, only to find out later that you only had, half the story.
All the time.
Makes you wonder how much we miss out on by thinking we've already got it all figured out.
That is such an important insight, and I think it circles right back to this whole enlightenment thing we've been trying to unravel. Maybe real wisdom is about understanding how little we actually understand, and then approaching, everything with more curiosity and a lot more humility.
This has been really eye-opening, but before we wrap up, I'm curious to get your take on one last thing the article brings up. The article ends on this really thought-provoking note. It asks, if enlightenment is really so far beyond what we can get our heads around right now, will we ever even know it if we see it?
Right.
And if we can't even recognize it, can we ever really say, yep, we're enlightened?
It's the big paradox at the heart of all this, isn't it? Like we're trying to put together this puzzle, but we don't even know if we have all the pieces. We might get these glimpses, these little flashes of, aha, maybe this is it.
Right.
But that full, complete understanding, always just a little bit out of reach.
So then how do we actually live with that? Are we all just supposed to wander around hoping we accidentally bump into enlightenment?
And that's where this article does this really cool thing. It says, what if we stopped thinking about enlightenment as this thing you arrive at?
Okay.
What if, instead of a destination, it's more about the journey, the constant searching, asking questions, and, just gradually understanding things a little better over time?
So it's less about saying, ta-da, I'm here, I did it, I'm enlightened, and more about admitting that we're all just students, really. Always learning, always growing.
Exactly. And, there's something kind of beautiful about that. It takes the pressure off needing to have all the answers and leaves you open to, everything.
Yeah, there's a real freedom in that. Like the freedom to be wrong sometimes, to change your mind, to be completely surprised by what you discover.
That's what it's all about, isn't it? It's like we've been talking about maps and guidebooks this whole time, but the real learning, the real transformation, that happens when you actually set out on the adventure.
Love that analogy. Really drives the point home. So I guess as we wrap up this deep dive into enlightenment, if there's one thing I'm taking away from all this, it's that maybe instead of getting hung up on definitions and finish lines, we can just embrace the journey, cultivate that sense of curiosity, stay humble, and just enjoy those little aha moments along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And who knows, maybe that is what enlightenment is really all about.
This has been amazing. Huge thank you to you for everything. And to all of you listening out there, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into, the mystery of enlightenment. Remember, it's the journey, not the destination. Until next time, keep those minds open and never stop exploring.